French rugby historically has been a symbol of talent and flair in the international game. If the All Blacks embody being efficient, clinical and ahead of the curve, then France would be the embodiment of being the ultimate momentum monkey and having so much X factor that you can trump any system with a little luck. And no team being able to truly prepare for a match against you, because even you don't have any idea what you're going to do next. But in recent years, that hasn't been enough. This 2019 Six Nations has highlighted that despite France being, in my opinion, more talented individually than most teams in the Six Nations, especially in the backs, they have only been able to defeat an injury-ravaged Scotland side, and at this point I genuinely believe that if Italy play well against them, they will have a genuine shot to cause an upset and beat the French. So how in the world did we get to this point? How did a team renowned for being flary giant killers become a team that over the course of this Six Nations have thrown away a 16-point lead at home in 40 minutes, through only their own actions get spanked by 40 points and be nilled for the first 70 minutes of an international game? Well, I think the best place to start is with the French Rugby Union. Now, to get into the minutiae of an entire organisation in one video that isn't strictly about that topic would be both pointless and time consuming, so I'm going to try and be as concise and to the point as I can. So let's first talk about the French Rugby Union's relationship with the top 14 French clubs. This relationship is frosty, to say the least, almost to the point that it barely exists, with the French club owners consistently snubbing the union's authority, seeing the international game as nothing more than a distraction from the top 14 and a chance for their players to get injured, as well as their players being out of action at the club level. This attitude towards the international game has seen French clubs recalling their players from the Six Nation camps in the middle of the Six Nations to play a league game. This isn't just exclusive to French players, as it includes all French club-based players. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, there isn't anything wrong with that. It's their right as club owners who have invested considerably financially in these players, who are essentially assets of these clubs, which I cannot argue with. But this is a major conflict of interest, both for the clubs and the rugby union, as well as the players themselves. Just this year, star players for Italy and Scotland respectively, Sergio Parise and Finn Russell, got concussed playing for their clubs in the middle of the Six Nations. Despite Finn's unfortunate injury working out for France, when French players do this, they both run the risk of being injured, but also burning out physically. You've got to remember, when these players are called back to their clubs, it is during what is supposed to be a rest week of an incredibly physically taxing competition, and the whole reason there is a rest week in there in the first place is because back-to-back games at the international level outside of the World Cup is not a reasonable thing to ask of a professional rugby player. World Rugby, especially if they're playing in the top 14. Speaking of which, the top 14 has had a massive impact on the performance of the international team in recent years, and like most things that cause any conflict, it's because of money and power, with this case having the two both feeding off each other. So French rugby since around 2005 has had an internal escalating arms race with itself, with every French club basically saying, oh yeah, you think you can offer insert world-class rugby player this amount of money? Well, I can offer insert other world-class rugby player this amount of money. Oh! Well, if you offer other world-class rugby player that amount of money, I will offer other world-class... You get the picture. The point being that wages in the top 14 were continuing to escalate at a rapid rate, and this wasn't an issue exclusive to the top 14 at the time, as other leagues were seeing that this was actually becoming an issue. As if this continued, the game wouldn't be sustainable. The Guinness Premiership decided to introduce a salary cap around 2008, with it being around £4 million. And around late 2009, France were looking to do the same thing. However, due to the wages in France being a lot higher compared to their English counterparts, they couldn't set a wage cap of a similar sum due to the fact that if they did, a lot of their teams would be forced to offload around half their squads to meet these new targets. So what they did was, they set a cap of around £7 million. To put that in context, the current wage cap for the English Premiership has only just passed this figure in the last year or two. In addition to this wage cap, they introduced a rule that the bill for the wages cannot exceed 50% of their overall turnover. This meant, in theory, this would stabilise the exponential rise in wage bills every year, giving the smaller clubs the chance to compete on a more level playing field. But it was later revealed that this wage cap hadn't affected a single club in the French league in terms of lowering their overall spend, as the wage cap was only 5% in excess of the highest spending French club at the time, which meant the whole endeavour meant nothing and did nothing, and would only continue the status quo of foreign players coming to France seeking a massive payday, which is, fair enough. And this decision to not make the same changes as the Premiership made has had a massive impact, both long-term and short-term, with pros and cons for both the international game and club rugby in France. In the short term, around 2010, the French league became the place to be for players to make money, attracting some of the biggest names and talent in the sport to the country. This in its infancy provided results in European competitions as well, with Toulon's rise to power, with them winning 3 consecutive European Cup trophies in a row from 2013 to 2015, with both the 2013 and 15 finals exclusively French affairs. with them facing Clermont every time, with the league now seemingly at the peak of its powers. But what this European success unintentionally did was set a trend long term that would be detrimental to both the league and, more importantly, the national team. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you may have seen a video I did about England having a golden generation of backs coming through currently. Now, in that video I touched on my belief that rugby, and sport in general, follow the trends of the top teams. I spoke about my disappointment that Bath's attacking free-flowing flair didn't bring more success, as I believe it could have pivoted English rugby in a more attacking direction, rather than the pragmatic, physical Saracens-esque direction that the Premiership seems to have gone down. Which I admit, though, it may not be my preference, but I do admit it's effective. Now, the reason I brought this back up is because the success of Toulon meant that they were the trendsetters, and all the other French clubs were going to try and copy what they did. But like most imitation, they left out a few details and were following a slightly more bullet-pointed, summarised version, which went roughly as follows. Most money, most success. Throw that money at as much talent as you can, and most importantly, power is power. Cersei Lannister. The Toulon team, by spending more money than anyone had ever spent, had a squad filled with world-class players who were also world-class monsters. But unfortunately, like most success stories, the wrong lessons were taken from it, with the other clubs in France seemingly looking at the sentence world-class monsters and only seeing the last word. The pro of this happening is that the top 14 became, and probably still is, the most physical league in the world, this making the French national side have one of the most physically imposing packs in the world. But the major con is that it has also become the slowest of the top tier professional leagues, which at first didn't matter, as the French teams could still outmuscle teams in Europe with the added star-powered dust to finish them off in the backs. But what we have seen in recent years is that if teams come up with a way to deal with that physicality and keep the tempo of the game high, the French teams can become stuck, with the exception to this being the Racing Club, who don't play in this typically Toulon-esque way. Furthermore, this monster-centric approach, as well as the financial focus on proven talent, has made it extremely difficult for French youngsters to make a name for themselves. I know us lot in England aren't exactly a glowing example of how to bring youngsters through, but the situation in France has become similar to the way English football is here, where financial backing of proven stars makes it extremely difficult to develop young academy prospects, with any ones who do manage to get through having masses of expectation on their shoulders. All of this has massively impacted the national side. With the league being so slow, players seem slightly off the pace at the international stage, as well as not nearly the amount of youngsters that should be coming through due to the emphasis on big names and size in the top 14. But despite all of this, there is still hope. Remember how I said that individually France had one of the most talented squads in the Six Nations? Well, that wasn't a throwaway line, but I believe the reason for this is a double-edged sword, because I believe the reason for this abundance of French talent that always seems to come through is because of their lack of a plan. Growing up around rugby, the one French word that I always heard associated with the sport was jouer, meaning play. It's often used by dads across the country to basically say play on during a mini-game, to basically say just get on with it. But in France, the same phrase is used even more, but taken far more literally for far longer. The phrase jouer literally embodies the way the French approach rugby at all levels. Play, express yourself, try something, experiment, play. And that philosophy goes all the way to the professional game as well, with it working for them in the past, with them always having the ability to score these amazing tries in broken field, because that's their bread and butter. That's what French rugby is all about. That's their culture and what their players are used to growing up. Off the cuff, improvising, and it's beautiful to watch. The problem is that rugby is a constantly improving sport, and when something improves, sometimes old practices are left in the past. French rugby can no longer survive in the international game on passion, emotion, talent, and a little luck anymore, because it just doesn't cut it anymore. The Northern Hemisphere has made great strides in the last few years to try and keep up with their Southern Hemisphere counterparts, with the introduction of things like central contracts, as well as the overall added emphasis on the international game in countries like Ireland and Wales. And the French style of sticking to their guns and thinking that everything will just come good eventually, as it often has for them, just doesn't cut it anymore. But the reason that there is still hope is that a lot of these obstacles and problems are fixable, as most of them are their own doing. They must find a way to tap into this immense individual talent that the country possesses, with their under-20 side winning their first ever World Championship last year. And it can't just be La Rochelle sweeping up all the young talent from around the country. There must be other outlets, or they can hope they get lucky and another French club is willing to take a risk, or try and implement a system for central contracts where the best talent, be it young and up and coming or the big stars, get specially managed. I understand this is very unlikely, both because of the fractured relationship between the clubs and the union, as well as the fact that the wage bills for these players are so high. It might not even be worth it to buy these players out of their contracts, because you're just going to get into another bidding war. And finally, they must get with the times. It's all well and good scoring an amazing try against England, but if you get thumped, it's all for naught. They must embrace change and employ from outside their own country, as they need new ideas and a new perspective. And if you get the right bloke, Ireland, Wales and England are examples that it works. Joe Schmidt seems to be the obvious contender, and I feel like if you're gonna throw money at anything, throw as much as you can at him. He's fluent in French and one of the best coaches in the world. Make it happen. You have to. He's the only man who I think can fix this. However, there is something I do love about the French just not caring what people think and just doing their own thing. And I guess it's beautiful in a way. It's a beautiful way to fail. Signed, NGJ. Apologies for the lack of upload in the last week, but I've been working on something pretty big.